So thank you very much. I thank in particular Mariana and Emilio for their help, and in general the organizing committee of the event and the scientific committee as well, of course. And so we have here a projection-oriented mathematical model for second species counterpoint. I say a projection, I mean a model because there are several possible ones. I will say more later. And my talk has 4 parts. In the first part, I give a small introduction to the topic. Then I explain the first species model because it's the foundation for the second species one, and some final remarks. So, Guarino Mazzola's counterpoint model is founded on the concept of strong dichotomy, and this encodes the notion of consonance and dissonance. And we'll tell a little bit more about this later. And the counterpoint symmetry, which is the carrier of contrapuntal tension and allows us to deduce the rules of counterpoint within this model, of course. I'm sorry because I didn't realize that I would not be able to draw or underscore, but well, I think everybody can see my pointer, I think. Yes, okay. So, strong dichotomy, this is the combinatorial part, I would say, of the model. It's something that I particularly like and I have been studying for a long time. And counterpoint symmetry, this is more specific to this model. And this is the difficult thing, to generalize. In fact, I think somehow we have to drop it in for future modulation. But well, in this case, it is possible to do it. So what's the problem with Mazzola's model? Well, that what we have been remarked several times by now, that it is restricted so far for species counterpoint. There's a single note against a single note, and it doesn't matter how much it lasts, but as long as it is one note against one note. So we need to increase the potential, so extend this model for analysis and composition, so it is indispensable to go first for a second species counterpoint model, and further if possible. In principle, this could be done with this model as well, and the same idea, and I think it's future work to prove that actually this basically extend, well, no, I would say extend, I would say that particularize it's for the first, so to the first species model. So, and it would be a good, I would say, conclusion of the program, because it's, I remember Sachs, and I think also Fuchs himself tells us that the model, the first species is the fundamental, I would say, theory for the counterpoint in general. So our approach in this for this as a first step is to extend the notion of counterpoint interval to a through interval. So, and we have an algebraic object, and we'll see how can this be done. And in fact, that's the thing, that we can do this in several ways. And well, I must say that I began working with this in 2008, 2009, and it has been a long time since I first reflected on, well, I concentrated on this. So I really don't remember sometimes how I came up with some of these things, among many other possibilities. And I think I will need to reconstruct this work. I don't know if you're aware, but there is a paper with Juan Sebastián Arias and Emilio, and where we analyze all this possible variations for the model, for the original first species model. So a similar thing can be done here, but with some extra complication, that you also the weight you can attach two tones to one tone. There are much more possibilities. So, but the point here is that first one should be on the downbeat and second one in the upbeat. Sorry, I don't remember that right now, but I think I'm using the Fuchs naming convention that downbeat comes first and the upbeat comes later. I think it's the opposite sometimes in music literature. So for our extension, the main idea is that the counterpoint symmetries in this case do not determine another two interval successor, but a first species interval, the downbeat. We want this because we want to blend species. Because, for instance, if one two interval determines another two interval, then we have to discard. If we want to go back to first species, we will need to discard the other interval. So I think that would be more natural than this approach, and we'll see that this founded on what Fox himself writes, and I think it's quite it goes along quite well with the musical practice as well. So let's check the first species case again. I always have to sketch the first model. At least, to the very least, because I am aware that not everyone is familiarized with it, or well, I don't know, perhaps I see a lot of familiar faces, so I think some of you already know this, but anyhow. So, since the 15th century at least, perhaps a little bit later, but it's a good point of reference. In what comes to counterpoint, the intervals can be partitioned into halves, the consonances. Here is also a contentious point because some say, well, beyond the octave, how do you justify the identification of the octave identification? I would say, well, because in the thesis they treat the intervals in the same way as if you have going down one octave, so. And in fact, you cannot go much farther than one octave beyond in the interval. So I think it's a rather good approximation already for this century, but and later even more so. So the prime or the octave, the minor third, major third, the fifth, perfect fifth, the minor sixth, and the major sixth are the consonances. And dissonances are everything else. Minor second, major second, fourth, the tritone, the minor tenth, and the minor seventh, major seventh. So the good thing about this is that there is a fine symmetry of the set 12. I remember they were doing octave identification that sends the consonances into dissonances and back. That's what it says here, that you transform with this affine map the consonances, you obtain dissonances, and if you do it again, you get back the consonances, and not a permutation of consonants, but in the same order. And this one is the affine, the polarity, of the strong dichotomy. And well, I'm not, I will not tell you here there is more than one. Or the details I would tell you, of course, there are more strong dichotomies. Well, at least you don't take into account the affine images. I mean, you can transform this with an invertible element from set 12 and add whatever you want. That would make equivalence class on the consonances. But it doesn't. It is not the only one that exists. But I will not delve into that point here because it's not the point. But I will give you some details of how the transfer or how to transform the consonants into dissonances. So 0 would go to 2 back. If you perform the calculations, the third, minor third goes into the fourth, the major fourth into the minor seventh, the fifth into the minor second. To the minor second, the minor sixth to the tritone, and the major sixth to the major seventh. And again, I say it will go forth and back. But this only speaks of one tone or one interval. We need two things: the cantus firmus and the discanthus. And the approach here is interesting, and this is the interesting part of the model. That you need counterpoint intervals as the cantus firmus and the distance from the cantus firmus to this cantus, that would go here in the dual part of the dual number idea of counterpoint intervals. And so you have this, you have the cantus firmus. In this case, this would be 2 equals 2. I would write it, but I can't with the pure PDF. And you would add the distance, this arrow. You would not put here 2 again. It would not be 2 plus epsilon 2. No, it would be 2 plus epsilon 0, because it's an octave. Octave. I'm not sure. And this is the original dual model idea. So the group of counterpoint symmetries, for the counterpoint intervals are of this form. You have here an invertible element of the dual numbers. It only needs to be invertible. This one could be arbitrary of whatever of the set 12 element of the set 12. And here also it's any element of set 12 epsilon, the dual numbers. And I think, the notation, starting notation for all the transformations of this form is a general linear group, a fine general linear group of this ring. And so for an arbitrary dichotomy, I told you there are more than one, but you can think of this as the original consonance and dissonance dichotomy. The sum of all consonant intervals is that you take any cantus firmus, but the distance should be a consonance. And all the dissonances are the other part. You take any cantus firmus and a dissonance as a dual part. So there is a canonical symmetry, P sub C, that exchanges the consonances, the counterpoint consonances into dissonance and back. And this is the induced polarity. The problem is that it's not unique. But the one that we want is in a certain way unique, that it preserves what is called a tangent space. But this is not indispensable for our discussion, but it's good to know. And it's good to remember that it's not the only one. It's not the only fine symmetry that exchanges consonances into dissonance, but when we're talking about the counterpoint ones, the ones that have a cantus firmus and a discantus. And we let this group, the fine general linear group, act pointwise on the subsets of dual numbers, in this case counterpoint intervals. And if you take one of them and transform all the consonances, these are the G-deformed consonant intervals, and G-deformed dissonant intervals are the transformation of the dissonances, of course. And this is the foundation of how we can get the allowed steps in the counterpoint. And this is important because the problem is, how do you allow any tension between a counterpoint interval and an alpha? Because they are both in the same part of the dichotomy. Here you have to pay attention now. We're not in the original interval dichotomy, but this is a counterpoint interval dichotomy. I mean, here are things that have cantus firmus and a distance, an interval between the cantus firmus and the discantus. So we're going from one consonant into another consonant. So here we have no tension, or we're going between a consonant and a consonant. That sounds really good, but how do you get any tension? That's the main problem that is to be solved with this model. So we deform the consonants and dissonance, and that's what I'm representing here, changing of color and deforming it. The blue part goes into this green part, and the orange part goes into this pink part. But look now that the original consonants now is at the form dissonance. So it's like a twisted perspective of the original dichotomy, and now you have a dissonance, a relative dissonance to these consonants and this symmetry, and then you have tension. You are resolving or relaxing tension from a relative dissonance into a relative consonance, but that is also an original consonance. So we can define counterpoint symmetries, things that do this job. With subject to three conditions. And sorry, I'm running a little bit out of time, but I think I can finish. First, the consonant that that begins the step should be a relative dissonance, not like this, because if it is like this, the deformation by the symmetry, then this is still the form consonant, so it's not working. I think I made a mistake here with the labels. They should be swapped. Sorry. The polarity, the induced polarity, should commute with symmetry. This is a little bit of a technical requirement, but it's also some kind of that is coherent. The transformation that is done by the polarity. If there is another polarity that exchanges the form consonants and dissonance, like a little bit like. So why would we require a polarity in the first place to be extended to the counterpoint intervals? That it would be like superfluous notion. So that in order to have a meaning, we require this commutation. And also this intersection of the form consonants and original consonants should be as large as possible. And this part is admitted successful. So I mean, all the consonants that are also the form dissonances can go from this part into this part, and that would be the rules of our counterpoint in this world of counterpoint that induced by these consonants and dissonances. If you change the consonants and dissonance into another or to another different class of under a fine symmetry, then you will get a different counterpoint theory. And this is also a very important feature of the model, that it relativizes the notion of counterpoint, not only to standard consonances and dissonances. And even, for instance, you can exchange the roles of consonant and dissonant intervals, and you get a legitimate dissonant counterpoint. So you can also have you have from dissonant interval, you can go to a dissonant deformed dissonance, and you get tension in this like mirror counterpoint. Something that is to be done in contemporary music, but it's like there was no natural logical way of doing it. So we can go now into the second species case. So we need as I told you, an algebraic structure when I can attach two intervals to a base tone, and quite naturally we take all polynomials of this form. That is like the quite natural next step after the dual numbers. You take the ideal generated by the squared variable, first variable, the second variable, and the product. So it allows us to disregard all the nonlinear parts. And of upper or larger degree, and we rename like the first like epsilon for the class of x, and second epsilon of the class of y. C would still be the Cantus firmus, and this would be the two intervals. So here you are. I have the Cantus firmus, one interval for the first for the upbeat, sorry, no downbeat, sorry. And the second one for the upbeat, right? So these are two interval, quite natural. And here's where I have been discussing with, particularly with one of Guarino's student. I don't remember his name. Sorry, I don't remember. But he said, "Well, but why this show? Why did you choose this? Why don't you take the dual, not the dual numbers, or like these two-dimensional dual numbers, but the same polynomial ring of one variable, and you discard all the elements of degree 3 or further, and say, and it would basically work the same way, and say, well, yes, in principle it would, but there are certain extra features of the model that perhaps would not be preserved. I studied that problem long ago, and I concluded it is not the most natural choice, but I no longer reconstruct the way to do it, but I think I will need to do that. But for the moment, this works. And we will not have symmetries, and that's a little bit of an error in the paper, that I call them symmetries, but actual projections, because we're going from going down in the dimensions. So in a 3-dimensional space will go to a 2-dimensional space, and in this way, the idea here is that for a one species case, you can take this square here, and this would act exactly the same as a dual number multiplication. So I add this component in order to have some control of it, but not a total influence. But that's why I chose to take this as 0. And once you perform the computations, you get an algebraic characterization of the commutation of the polarity, in this polarity and the symmetry, that is just an extension, right, or a perturbation of the original one, of the first species case. So we have a counterpoint projection that accomplishes this by making it this should be a dissonance, relative dissonance, in the form of projected consonances. The square of the projection in the original first species, I would say, counterpoint, and the projection should commute, and this would be the canonical polarity of the first species interval, then the successor, and the cardinality of the intersection is maximal among all that is possible. So everything works fine, at least from the theoretical view. In the first species case, you prove that you have to perform all the calculations based in the Cantor 0, and then translate properly. So this is essentially what it says, the theorem here, that there is a special projection that can do all the work of any other projection, and you can check the Cantor 0. So you have only to check the first, the downbeat interval, and then the upbeat interval, but you have to check that there is a different set for each consonance that each potential dissonance, or the second interval. You have to perform a calculation for each of them. And you have a counterpoint theorem that every interval has at least k squared set to k. In this case, it would be 36 in the classical case of set 12. And at most, I don't remember, this 2k squared minus k. I think it's 48. I'm not sure for set 12. But in general, it is the same, and essentially it preserves, when you check all the output of the algorithm, of Hitcher's algorithm, you see that basically it preserves most of the prohibitions. And actually, if you check the first example, valid example of second species counterpoint in the Kraus ad Parnassum, and here you can see the intervals. I will just show you a couple of them. Here you have 2, this is because it's a D, and the interval from D to A, it's a fifth, and then you have here an octave. So that's what this is 1 is 0, a fifth and an octave. And also here you have a F, that is 5, and a third, major third, so it's 4, and a tritone, that is 6, and so on, right? And by the way, this is, I say the first ballot because before that one, there is a student attempts to write second species by himself, but he makes a mistake of putting something that, when you disregard the second interval, well, the upbeat interval, then you have parallel fifths. So that's why the teacher says that it's not valid, and it's the same. You have the same projection model. So this is a good thing. Also, it's nice because it's also for the. I remember that for the Tau Batuta, also it works for the in the Fuchs. In the first species model, it works as is intended in the Fox treatise. So, well, I put a little bit of detail, but I'm running out of time. This is a consonance, and if you transform it with the projection, you get 5/4. So that tells that it's valid to take that to interval this interval can be defined arbitrarily. You can take what you need for the purposes of the melody or the counterpoint. Of course, this one should also work with the next interval, but I would say that that's the problem of the composer. So we quickly compare this with the Fuchs approach. I would read this one. The second species results when two half notes are set against a whole note. The first of them comes on the downbeat and must always be consonant. The second comes on the upbeat, and it may be dissonant if it moves from the preceding note and to the following note stepwise. That's the main restriction of the second species, one of the main restrictions. But I would say it's natural for our model because we don't take into account melodic considerations. And however, if it moves by a skip, it must be consonant. But I would say this makes a lot of sense if you are going to sing this, because if you want to sing a dissonance, it's much easier to do that if you are moving stepwise. But for an instrument, this makes in exactly the same case to do it whatever you want. So, but well, anyhow, we take this step of the zero. I remember that we can concentrate on the zero case and to another one. And we check if the second one, for the first case that I call here first case, if it is stepwise. So I allow it if it connects to a ballad step in first species, and the second at the upbeat of the first interval, to interval, is connected stepwise to the scantus. And the other one is if you have a consonant in the upbeat, then you check just that if you duplicate the cantus firmus, you get a ballad first species progression. So when you do the calculations, there is a GitHub. I have in my GitHub account the code for the computations. You get this number of case one possible sequences, and this for the second case. And as you can see, the projection model covers most of it. What Fuchs predicts. We're taking the simplification of Martini's simplification, that you are not allowed only direct movement into a perfect consonance as the criteria for checking the validity of the first species Fuchs model. So Fuchs can the things that the projection model cannot explain, but only Fuchs can. It's only 6.8% and 4.1% for case 1 and 2. So I think it's rather acceptable. And you say, well, but the problem is that you accept most of the things, of course, but this is also a problem of the first species model. It also accepts most of the progressions. That's why we take the same approach of Martini, that we are checking what is not allowed, not what is allowed, because most of things are allowed. And also it's what Juno did for his when he makes these graphs of the counterpoint worlds, when you check all the allowed steps, it's easier to just draw what is not allowed and not what is not allowed, what is allowed, because it's a much smaller graph. So here are my references. There is of course more in the article, but I just want to call your attention to the Mazzola's original formulation of the model. Here's my extension for the general microtonal counterpoint. This also is microtonal second species counterpoint. Here's a source of the Fuchs approach, what we use like the canonical reference, and the computation for first species, where I take this 89.771% is from Nieto's calculation for his BS thesis. And well, that would be all. That's it. Thank you very much. I don't know if there is some time for questions. I run out of time a little bit, I think. Yes. Yes? Uh-huh. Well, yeah. Fine. It's choice among many, but it's a general framework of the topos of music, and it requires some justification to restrict oneself to find, but you can actually extend that. There is an article that is in the contributions to discrete mathematics, when I consider the case when you can take not only affine symmetries but also relatively arbitrary polarities. But I actually, well, you studied the combinatorics of the problem, but in principle, as long as you have the three conditions for a polarity, you can do it would work in principle with general transformations. Mm, yes, I did. But I did not take note of it in the article, but you can actually see the output and check it. But I remember the thing that I remember is that mask parallel fifths are not allowed. I mean, if you take away the upbeat part and you get parallel fifths, that's in general is not allowed. And you cannot go in the cantus firmus and skip from and triton skip is not allowed all times. So I remember that's the general pattern, but but you're right. I remember seeing it for a while the valid the projection mode of valid only progressions, and I don't remember spotting a particular pattern. But I think it would be a nice project for a sequel. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much as well, and thanks.